All right, we are live. Episode 5.
That's it. 5, halfway to 10.
We're on our way through the seven episode mini series, and
7. It's like Band of Brothers, but way more boring.
Band of Ball Brothers.
Band of Ball Brothers.
We just had to we had to hurry up and hit the record button because we've been talking a lot off camera, and it's worth pointing out that that we don't prepare for these podcasts whatsoever. We have a very, very loose topic, which is usually just one word, and we just fire it up and let it rip. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and if there's ever something that anybody wants us to touch about and we can find a way to implement it into a podcast, we will. We don't mind a little bit of direction. Just because you put a suggestion in doesn't mean we're going to put it into an appendix or anything like that. But we are so unstructured that if you have a point of structure, we'll probably touch on it.
Yeah, we'll probably get way off track from it and then hopefully bring it back around, and we'll see what happens in between. So it's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
How you doing today?
Doing all right. It's it's week 11 of the uni semester, so it's the business end of the season. This is where there's a lot going on. This is where sleep starts to get a bit interrupted. Stress levels are a bit higher. It's a very familiar feeling, and I cannot wait for it to come to an end. So thankfully the end is in sight. Even though it's not that far away, it's the end of the year potentially, but it feels like it's just so near but so far. So it's it's a privilege to be able to do this and to go through it. I'm not whinging or complaining, but I'm definitely ready for it to come to an end. So
yeah, I hated every minute of chiropractic school. I'll be perfectly frank with her. I hated every minute of school, period. Just not the individual that likes to sit in a desk and fill my brain with things that I needed. So people are like, wow, you must love school. You went to school for so long. You have a biochemistry degree and all this other stuff. And I was like, I hated every flipping moment of it. I've learned more since stopping school in all facets of my life than I did during school. Like I have Jeopardy knowledge from school, but I'm killer at trivia. But besides that, it's like I've learned to build a computer. I've learned to actually become a decent physician. I've learned to build things. I've learned to do so much more outside the confines of a traditional school environment. And I think, in general, most people with my personality type would agree, right? Like hard driving men or hard driving women, hard driving individuals, sorry, BuzzFeed, don't like to be in confined school environments. So yeah, I get what you mean. I couldn't wait for school to be over. I was like, I'm so pumped for this to just be absolutely done. Nobody telling me what to do. I don't like to be told to do.
Yeah, I think we're all wired a little bit differently too. So I think what probably I find really tedious and if not difficult sometimes, especially in undergrad, the first subjects that I did in chemistry and physics and stuff like that, man, I struggled. I had to work really hard, and I ended up doing okay with those subjects, but I really had to work for it because it's not my thing to work in that way with numbers. So I had to sort of wade through that, and I had to work pretty hard through the first few years just to kind of get to the stuff that I was really hanging out for. And then that's come pretty thick and fast as well. So it's a process, and not to deter anyone that's thinking about maybe a career change, or if you're a young student, this is still a really rewarding process if you think that this is for you. And part of my journey, if I can share that, if you'll indulge me.
I will.
Yeah. I took a little bit of a different path because obviously, I'm closer to 40 than I am to 30. So I'm a bit older, and coming in with, I guess, a little bit more mileage on me. So it just changes your perspectives a little bit. And I think maybe you appreciate that opportunity a bit more. So there's a lot of people that have contributed and given a lot to helping me to be able to do that. So there's a big responsibility for me to come out in the best shape that I possibly can. That's, I think, how I repay that. So that's something that I take seriously. But I was very lucky that I made a good decision at the start. And in first year, my goal, and I guess more like my vision, was that I wanted to be more of a soft tissue heavy chiropractor, which is kind of weird in a sense, like that. You don't see that very often, but that was where, as a punter, as a patient, I always got the most bang for buck through soft tissue treatment. All those niggling CrossFit sort of gym injuries, the thing that would turn that around was good soft tissue treatment. And it stood out to me. It was weird that wasn't traditionally a focus for most practitioners. It was sort of like a throw a bit in at the end to keep them happy kind of thing. But generally speaking, most professions, and I'm talking very broadly, but most of those practitioners would have their go-to. So whether that's adjusting a joint, or whether that's prescribing exercises, whatever it is. But I just thought it was weird that at that level, that soft tissue management wasn't done very specifically. It seemed like a gap. So I was lucky that in first year, I made the decision to study remedial massage. I did that externally, which was a nightmare because it was just all this extra work. But I pushed through it, got it done. And, what that opened up for me was just a whole new world of being able to work in a way that was relevant to what I was studying, but just to get hands on people. And so you start building that palpation database straight away, and you can't really rush that. I think you can try to do it and get more reps, but it's just time, and it's having hands on enough different people over time. And I got to experience some other cool shit. I got to start my own business, and I got to be a bit entrepreneurial, and so all these things I got to do pretty early. But it just fueled that idea of soft tissue kind of being at the forefront. And so I got to tease that out, develop that, and figure that out. And so I'm kind of sharing that story because, if we do ever get another potential student or someone that is starting their journey or thinking about a career change or going down this path, and we hang some shit on the education sometimes because it's just a process that you go through. But, to consider something like that, from my experience, it was a game changer. And I think it's a little bit unusual because most people would kind of go, well, firstly, it's a cost. You have to pay for something up front in terms of studying an external course. Secondly, it's a lot of extra time, but I'd really, encourage anyone to consider that if you're going down that route, because it's been a massive deal for me. It's put me in a position where I'm talking to this lovely gentleman on the other side of the world here.
Lovely.
Yeah.
I've never been called that. Yeah. Today's a good day. What is it? May 20th?
But so it's just something to think about. And it, I don't necessarily have all the answers, but it's a bit of a blueprint to consider, I think. And as a massage therapist, there's essentially two things that you can't do. So I am going to loop this back around to today. It's coming. One of the major things that you can't do is that you can't adjust or manipulate joints with high velocity, low amplitude manipulations. So essentially, chiropractic adjustment is off the table if you're a massage therapist, which it should be. You're not insured for it. It's just not part of the scope. So, we take that out. The other thing that you can't do is that you can't provide an official diagnosis of a condition. So you can't actually take a piece of paper and write out someone's diagnosis and tell them exactly what you're saying that they have is their disorder, is their problem. And you can't refer that out to another practitioner with a written referral as I have diagnosed, Mrs. Jones with XYZ. But in saying that, in my role in managing that patient as a soft tissue therapist, I still want to arrive at the same point, whether or not I can write that diagnosis out. So I still want to have all that knowledge. I still want to understand exactly what's going on. I still want to know. So whether or not I can actually be very, very clear in the sense of a clear written diagnosis, or whether I just have that knowledge, which is going to inform the treatment, I really don't care. The diagnosis is important, and we're going to throw that over in a second to dig into that. But my point is, for soft tissue therapists and remedial massage therapists out there that want to get into more specific work, there's a huge gap, I think, out there in the market for you to step up into, because, people need really well-directed, well thought out and specific soft tissue care. It can be hard to find. And so even if you can't provide an official diagnosis to your patient, which is something that at the moment I can't do, you can still get right up to that point, and you can have all of that information, you can have all of that understanding. And if you're treating a condition that you want to help them with, then you should have that, because that's what feeds into your treatment. So there we go. On that note, let's talk some diagnosis.
Let's do it. Yeah. And you can arrive at a really, really quality conclusion without even technically having a diagnosis, right? I mean, there's a difference between saying that your straight leg raise is, functionally 60% capacity, and saying that there's a sciatic nerve entrapment. But what does that really change about how you treat it, right? Because if you're going to improve a 60% functional straight leg raise, you're going to look at the sciatic nerve, right? You're not saying it, you're not explicitly diagnosing them as, maybe I would, but we're both coming to the same conclusion, even if yours is in your head, and we're both treating the same thing. So yeah, if you're an MT out there, or general, I don't know, soft tissue therapist, I don't know what that would even be an equivalent to in the United States, you can do this better than most of, I would say, even above average chiropractors. You're going to get people out of pain better than most individuals. So, but you got to have the diagnosis, even if it's just in your head.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the gap for a lot of people that are wanting to have the tools to work a bit more specifically. The education that you get to actually get your foot in the door as a massage therapist it's not very thorough, and it's a little bit like becoming a personal trainer. I think I don't know what it's like in the States, but here I think it's like a 12-week course, or maybe less, maybe an 8-week course. I'm not sure, but it's a very short thing. You get some basics and you get your ticket to go out and train people. But the people that really set themselves apart and that really do well are the ones that then go forward and get a lot more education. They get more specialisation. They get mentoring, all of those things to really drive it. And so they're very self-motivated, and they have something in mind that they want to do. And I think it's a bit like that with the soft tissue work. I think you can really get out there and achieve a lot and do a lot of good and really help people. But if you try to do that straight off the bat, you don't get a lot of tools straight away. So there's a bit of work to do.
Yeah. And then every incremental improvement to your skill set is going to provide you with an exponential return. So you make a 5% improvement to your skill set, you're getting a 30% improvement to both your patient results and your financial compensation and everything like that. So it's hard work to make that 5% gain. It's really, really difficult. It's harder than anything else you've ever done, but it's absolutely 100% worth it. So
yeah, like everything that we've kind of covered so far in our special mini series, it's really at this point leading up to arriving at a point, which is the diagnosis, which is understanding what's involved in this person's problem. And it might be a little bit more detailed than what people think, right? So rarely are these problems happening in isolation. And I think when I've sort of seen some diagnosis stuff that we've done through the education process that I've had, it's probably a little bit simplistic in the sense that it may be a symptom pattern. So it may be more like have a syndrome attached to it, or an itis attached to it, or it may just be kind of pointing at something that's a little bit more localized without having enough consideration for the other things that are involved. Especially when, you and I deal a lot more with sort of chronic conditions. And so by the time it's gotten to that point where we're actually assessing it, there's a lot more involved in that problem. Yeah. Is that sort of what your thought process has been over the last few years as well?
Yeah, I mean, there is a difference between a diagnosis that your insurance company will accept in order to compensate you for the services, and a diagnosis that is tissue specific, accurate, and gives you an understanding of how to guide your treatment moving forward. Yeah. So I hate syndromes. Syndromes are my pet peeve because, as you said, syndromes are just symptom sets. Carpal tunnel syndrome, IT band syndrome. Those just tell us a general symptom set, and it might not even be your carpal tunnel, and it might not even be your IT band. It's most likely not your IT band. Just for those of you listening out there. Itises, so an itis is an acute inflammatory response. It's a cytokine storm. That was a fantastic mention by the newscast over here in New York, referring to coronavirus, cytokine storm. Thank you, inflammation. But when an itis is actually an itis, so a biceps tendonitis, when your biceps is actually acutely inflamed, that's a really good diagnosis. It's tissue specific. It provides you the source of the dysfunction. But of the people who say that they have itises, who've been misdiagnosed by other physicians, so many of them do not have a quote unquote itis. I get a ton of biceps tendonitis, and I go, okay, how long has this been? And they say, it's been about 6 months. And well, from a functional standpoint, you can't have an acute inflammation of 6 months. You can re-irritate a chronic inflammation and therefore make it both chronic and acute. But the chances are that you have a 6 month long prolonged tendonitis is very, very rare. So getting an accurate diagnosis, it comes down to kind of opening your mind up to diagnoses that aren't traditionally used, and getting your brain away from, okay, this spot hurts, itis, this spot hurts, syndrome, this spot hurts. I don't even know what they call it. Not a subluxation, but a joint mechanic dysfunction or something like that. Or
fixation.
Joint fixation, right? Yeah. Motion palpation, lumbar spine, L4, L5, restricted in extension. So that kind of brings up my next point, is you can have a tissue specific diagnosis and it is tissue specific, but it's just flat out wrong, or it's not as right as it needs to be. And as we've discussed, right, a 5% improvement is going to get you an exponential return. So yeah, maybe they're stuck in extension on L4, L5, but is that because L5, S1 isn't flexing well enough and they have to be locked into extension? So you have to kind of look into that. So yeah, the diagnosis has to be tissue specific, and it has to be right. And you have to be able to look at that diagnosis and both forward engineer it to the test if you're hypothesizing based on a history. And then after you take the tests and the exam, you have to then reverse engineer that diagnosis back into the history. It all needs to make sense. It's never going to be, I don't know, it might be this. It should never might be anything. You have to know. And if that requires imaging, then that requires imaging. You can say, hey, I'm not sure. It might be a handful of these things. We have to go test some things out further in order to confirm or deny those. But when the diagnosis is set, it's set. It has to be right. Every once in a while, maybe I'm wrong one time out of 100 and have to go back and say, hey, I fucked this up. I'm sorry. This is what I think it is now. But it has to be definitive. It has to be specific. It has to make sense both forwards and backwards. And then on top of that, it has to make sense as you check it with your treatment. Is your treatment working to improve that diagnosis? If your treatment is not improving that diagnosis, even if it's improving, say a functional test, then you were wrong, right? So it's a very complex thing. And sorry, I'm on a tangent right now, but a lot of people will come in and wonder, hey, why don't you treat me on the first visit? It's because I got to sit down and fucking think about it. Like, every once in a while, it's a slam dunk. Well, I won't say every once in a while. There are slam dunks where you're like, boom, no, this is happening. Everything works. I know this is what it is. And I could treat you on the first visit and probably get you a 15 to 20% reduction in your symptoms. But a lot of times I've got to sit and think about it. I've got to sit and think, okay, is this just a physical manifestation? Is there some emotional things going on there? Is there some metabolic things going on? If it is physical, is it physical to the point where it's functional and I can fix it? Or is it physical to the point where you're going to need an orthopedic surgeon to fix it? So much goes into that diagnosis, and we stress it so much. I once got feedback on on my Instagram page. I was, using somebody as a professional consultant, and she's like, don't you think that you should talk about anything except getting accurate diagnoses and adhesion? Like, where's your special stretches? Where's all this stuff? And I was like, that's all that fucking matters to me. And she's like, oh, okay. So yeah, it's so important. We have to invest a vast majority into figuring that out, because if we don't figure it out, then the patient doesn't get better. If the patient doesn't get better, they don't refer their friends. If they don't refer their friends, I go hungry. So it's literally life or death for me to get that accurate diagnosis. I spit up everywhere.
That example that you made there is not unusual, that people would think that why is this such a labored point? But why not? Like, if you're the patient, it should be absolutely like the most important thing, because if it's not, then you're likely getting something that's not well directed to your problem, and you're wasting time, you're wasting money. It's not a good thing, right?
And it's comforting to the patient. How many patients have you had come in where they just say, nobody's been able to figure this out. I just want to know what is wrong. They don't even want to be fixed, right? I mean, we're going to fix them, or we're going to find some way to fix them, but they're so encapsulated by the concept of not knowing what's wrong that you will deliver all the value that the patient could possibly fathom by saying, hey, you have a sciatic nerve entrapment in between your piriformis muscle and the superior gemellus. And they're like, I've never heard that before. I'm like, yeah, you're not going to find any information about it online either, but that's unequivocally what's wrong with you, and I'm unequivocally going to fix it. And they go, oh, cool. Just understanding what's wrong is this foreign concept to them that it just blows their mind, because so many people are so wrong.
Yeah, it's an important point. I think the amount of thought that you put into this, because it's not just something that happens in a very short time. You have to actually take and we've been through this. We've been through what taking a history is, and the gathering of the data and the symptoms and all this stuff. All of that has to then be considered to start arriving at the conclusion you need to be at before you can progress to treating anything. And, that what you just talked about, that process of taking the time to slow down and to do that, that happens outside of what the patients might see. And that's a thought process that happens, and that's important. That needs to take the amount of time that it needs to take, because it has to be right. And sometimes it doesn't happen once. You might reconsider something and come back and look over that again. And then that process that you explained it's considered forward and it's considered backwards. And so what that means by going backwards is that once Mike arrives at a diagnosis and he's got his list of things that are happening in this person, he needs to take each one of those things and actually retrofit that back into the history and all of the data that he's collected, and needs to be able to explain every single one of them with the data that he's got. And if something doesn't fit, then he's not there yet. And there's more work to do. And so all of this is happening outside of what a patient would probably see in the office, and part of it. But, it's that dedication that Mike has got to getting to the right answer. And that's where the value is.
Yeah. And I don't want to seem like I'm some altruistic individual that is just sweating over the hell. I mean, I want to get you better, but it's my livelihood. It's my profession. It's my job. So if you're an accountant, you don't want to do a shit job, right? If you're an IT professional, you don't want to do a shit job. It's something that if I don't do, I will wake up at 11:30 p.m. and be like literally in a cold fucking sweat, being like, did I miss something? Did I miss something because I was rushing? And again, the accurate diagnosis helps the patient, and it's going to help me too, because I like to sleep at night and I like to be right, and I like to get people better because I have an ego. So outside of selfless motivations, I have plenty of selfish motivations. So don't put me on a pedestal or or crown me or anything like that. But the beauty of the way that we've set up our practices is it's good for both parties. That's the beauty of medicine. It's the beauty of free market. So it's
very fulfilling, I think, as for you and I to get something right. That's a slam dunk. And if we get it right, then we're helping someone in a big way. And so they're super happy. So everyone wins,
Oh, for sure.
But to get to that point, you've got to slow down. That was one of the biggest things that I think I've sort of taken away so far this year. It's just got to slow down. Everything's got to slow down. The whole process of the history taking's got to slow down. The whole process of the examination's got to slow down. Just the palpating tissues, when we were training, and Carl, Dr. Natoli, came over and just gave me a very small, subtle cue just to slow down the palpation and really kind of sink into that and just appreciate it a bit differently. And that was huge. That changed so much just with that small thing. And, I can take that and that idea of slowing down and apply it across the whole process, and it all gets better. It just does. And, I've seen practices that have 15-minute consult windows, which is the whole thing. Like, that's the whole consult. That's end to end. I know in our space, there's places that have 15-minute treatment windows and stuff, and that works because it's set up that way. But, I'm sort of leaning more towards like a traditional chiro where someone comes in. And so there's just not, that process isn't there. So it would be interesting to see, compare the outcomes maybe and see how they stack up. But man, slowing down is just huge.
Yeah. And it's not like this perpetual arduous slowdown that doesn't provide any efficiency benefits in the future either. It's like with anything, you delay a little bit of gratification and you obtain a ton of satisfaction. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, my appointment windows are 20 minutes for a couple of different reasons that are outside the practicality of a traditional chiropractic office. And I'm not saying that I take up 20 minutes every time. I take up as much time as I need to fix the patient. And typically what happens is if I take my time at the beginning, I understand, I have diagrammed the exact location of where the adhesion is. I know where I'm looking for right away. It's boom, 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 4 or 5 passes, one structure, 4 or 5 passes in the other structure. And if I like you, then we shoot the shit for 12 minutes. If I don't like you, then I say, okay, well, when would you like to reschedule? You know what I mean? So it's putting in work or front loading the work, much like anything in fucking life. You could be meal prepping, you could be working on fundamentals in CrossFit, you could be doing anything. Put a lot of work in at the beginning, and it's going to make your life a lot easier down the road. And it makes my life a lot easier. It makes the patient's life a lot easier. You're not paying per minute of treatment, right? I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. You're paying for results. And if I can get you those results and get you back to your family sooner, right? If you're a person that's taking the Long Island Railroad into my office after work from the city, your ass wants to be home before 8 p.m. And if I can do that in 7 minutes and get you on your way, you're going to love me for it because I'm going to get your results too. And I'm going to get you home faster. So your dog doesn't shit on the couch.
The important point there is that it's all front loaded though, right? So all of that work is already done. You've got all your diagnostic information. You know exactly what you need to do. So it's not a case of someone walking in as a new patient and just getting whacked a few times very quickly and on their way so that the next person can come in. It's a very well managed process. And so that's not to say that a 15-minute treatment session is a bad thing, because
no, not at all.
It's certainly an awesome thing if it's, it's part of a plan that's already been front loaded. And to your point, if you can get what you need in that time and be on your way, that's beautiful. But yeah, it needs to be it's a small part of a bigger plan.
It needs to take as much time as it needs, no more, no less. Period. And that goes for both the beginning, the middle, and the end. I'm going to take as much time as I need with you. The appointments are scheduled in a way such that I know that I'll be able to get 99.999% of those appointments done within the 20-minute time frame, or the 45-minute to an hour time frame. They're usually 45 minutes my first visit, and then I will block out another 15 minutes after that to allow myself some time to think about it before moving to the next person. And then oftentimes before I leave home, I have every new patient that I've seen that day, a complete list of their diagnoses. I've got a report of findings all typed up, and I have a plan of attack. So maybe on average, every new patient, an hour and 15 to an hour and a half of time. So it's pretty substantial, even if you're only getting 50 or 45 minutes of it. You put that work in there, and then it's smooth sailing to get out of chronic pain. We are now entering an infomercial.
Yeah. And so there's limits in how many people that you can see a day, because you have to keep that quality high. So if there's a certain amount of time that needs to go into, let's say there's a 45-minute consult that turns into another, over an hour, once you've done some back end work and you've put in all your extra time into managing, setting up that case, you've only got so many hours in the day, you got to live too. So that's how we keep the quality high.
Yeah, and that's maybe why the price structure is different too from a traditional chiropractor. I mean, put it this way: if I'm spending 15 minutes with you, and Joe Schmo down the street is spending 15 seconds with you, we're getting paid the same amount as based on whatever your insurance company is compensating us for. At least in the States, I have no idea. Yeah, you can bill up codes, you can say you do this, you can say you do that, but many of those codes are timed to, and they're not timed to suit people who take more time with their patients well. So what I decided is, well, I could either do 5-minute treatment sessions and I could, bang out 20 people in a day and bill your insurance and make a healthy living. Or what I could do is I could see less people, keep the quality high, develop real deep personal relationships with many of my patients, because we spend a lot of time getting to know each other and learning about each other. And I'm going to charge what I deem suitable value for my time and what the market deems suitable value for my time. So the most common question that I get is, do you accept my insurance? And I don't typically have time or have the opportunity to explain that to a prospective new patient on the call, but there it is. I do it to keep quality high. You can buy a pair of leggings from your local dollar store, or you can buy a pair of leggings from Lululemon. And you may argue the fact that Lululemon is overpriced. I don't know if it's overpriced, particularly for New Yorkers here in the States. I'm sure
it's overpriced.
What's that? I'm sure it's fucking an arm and a leg in Australia.
Yeah.
But you don't just purchase that piece of fabric when you purchase Lululemon. You purchase the clean website interface. You purchase the beautifully set up store with a friendly, good-looking, young, fit employees. You purchase the fact that if at any point you're unsatisfied with a product, they just replace it for you. So, I'm not looking to be. You can make a lot of money being the McDonald's of chiropractic care. You can make a fucking boatload of money, and there's a lot of people that have made a fucking boatload of money doing that way. I'm just not that person. I would rather be, I don't know what's a nice steakhouse in Australia, but the Peter Luger, which is a really famous steakhouse here in New York City, of chiropractic. I'd rather see less. I'd rather give you every value of every penny, the most premier experience that you've ever had at one point, right? I think I'm relatively premier for my peers at this point, but I don't have a lot of the bells and whistles because I'm bare bones, but that's eventually what I want. I want you to be able to think, who's the best? What's the best experience I can have? And I'm going to provide that for you. And I'm going to provide that for you largely because I've taken my time. I've gotten the right diagnosis. I have ensured that we've made a personal connection and getting you results.
So on the theme of that higher quality service solution, what's an example, without going, I guess, into any sort of patient specifics, identifying specifics, but what's an example of maybe someone that's come in with a diagnosis that they've been given for an injury that they've had for a while, and then after going through this process with you through a new patient consult, an exam, and then retrofitting all that to arrive at a diagnosis that you provide, what do they look like in terms of Part A and Part B? How do they compare?
In terms of the two diagnoses?
Right. So, like, what's an example of something that's different?
So, I mean, I had a patient, my first patient, and she listens to this. So, Elaine, if you're listening, I love you. You're the best. I will always remember you and always be appreciative that you came in. Literally the first patient that I ever had that I didn't have a personal connection with. Wasn't my, aunt or uncle or cousin. So she comes in, hips out of whack is what she basically told me. Hey, my hips are out of line. I feel a little bit cockeyed, things like that. And I'm like, well, that's a weird, I know inherently that that's not a great diagnosis. Well, you've got a PI ileum, and I'm just going to friggin' drop table you back into place. If that's right, if that's what it was, then you wouldn't be here in my office right now. So, she was more advanced in age, had some wear and tear from commuting to the city for substantial periods of time through her life. We took the history, and, I had a pretty good idea that there was some arthritides in there. Went through, did the exam, noticed that her quadruped lumbar flexion, so her lower back function, was 20%. Went and palpated, mild, maybe 1+ or 2 of adhesion. I knew that a mild 1+ or 2 wasn't going to account for an 80% functional deficit. Sat down with her. Boom. You have some adhesion, ma'am. There's osteoarthritis in your lower back. It's not your hips out of whack. If anything, one side of your lower back is shorter than the other because it's adhered more so than the other. I'm going to go in. I'm going to remove this adhesion. We can expect to see, maybe I told her like a 30% reduction in symptoms. And she was like, wow. Like, first of all, she'll admit now if you ever talk to her, she's like, oh, I guess I could just give this guy a whirl, right? We'll see what happens. And, I just got a very, very pleasant email from her the other day. I haven't seen her in 2 months because of the lockdown. And she's like, I haven't taken a single pill of Tylenol, Aleve, or Motrin since the moment that you put your hands on me. Or, maybe it's like a week after that. And yeah, that's the kind of impact. That's the example of somebody that's come in with a pretty shit diagnosis, in my opinion. I took the time, explained it to her, and, we fixed it. And the beautiful thing about it is that when I was done with her back, she was like, oh, my wrist hurts. Oh, my neck hurts. Oh, my knee hurts. And so she's been, hey, I can't walk down the stairs to get to the subway without discomfort. Go in, see the knee. She didn't even have a diagnosis for the knee. Her whole capsule was adhered to shit. Obviously, some osteoarthritis in there as well. Got her a 50% improvement there. Boom, neck hurt. Again, arthritis, adhesion in the suboccipitals. She had some facet-mediated pain. Boom, went in and cleaned that up. So it's like the wrist, all jacked up with adhesion. She had superficial nerves that were entrapped to the superficial tissue. She was getting burning and not a traditional dermatome or peripheral nerve pattern. And what it just was superficial nerve. So does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, it's just it's the detail, I think, because all of that stuff that you've listed off, if we take maybe the original diagnosis might have been like a fixated SI joint or something like that.
And again, it didn't make a ton of sense to her, but we'll say it was a PI ileum, something arbitrary like that.
Okay, so that essentially means that the pelvis is like kind of rotated. Yeah, it's stuck. It's not working properly. And so then you've kind of examined a little bit wider than that and palpated, looked at the soft tissues, looked at the function, and you've kind of brought it back to some degeneration in the lumbar spine that obviously we can't do much about, but we can clean up around it and give it the best chance it's got, right? So I'm actually doing my research project for final year at the moment on osteoarthritis, and I'm doing it on the spine, and particularly the cervical spine. And yeah, cervical, not cervical.
Cervical.
Yeah.
You're saying that you said a couple of things today that I don't know if people will be able to see because of the new video format, but I'm loving it right now.
There's actually almost no, not almost no, but there's very little research and literature that exists on osteoarthritis of the spine, which I kind of find disappointing because it's quite a disabling problem. I pulled up a professional guideline that is published in Australia for general practitioners that manage OA, and it only addresses the hip and the knee, which are obviously very big problems, and carrying too much weight generally throughout the population, it's not a problem that's getting better. But yeah, I found it really interesting that there was no mention of the spine in there. And, you know, when
I have the
those,
answer for you when you're ready, by the
yeah,
way.
yeah, okay.
I know why.
But when those joints start to go, and you can't necessarily look over your shoulder properly, you know, the effects of that are huge. Try checking your blind spot properly when you're driving your car, when you really need to quickly to be safe. And that just progressively gets worse. It's quite disabling. So yeah, I've been doing a lot of reading on that, and you know, it's disappointing. I think that the advice is mostly around just there's not much. How do I put it? There's not much in there to actually deal with peripheral tissues. And so what they're saying is that there's not much evidence to support these therapies, so soft tissue therapies and things like that. But man, if you get your hands on people that have got these arthritides going on in their joints and you palpate what's going on around it, there's a lot that can be cleaned up, and there's a lot that can be helped, and it can be improved a lot as well. So yeah, that I'm getting off track here, but you know, I think we can bring that back to diagnosis, because if you diagnose an arthritic joint, that's not a complete diagnosis, because it's very, very likely that around that joint, it hasn't moved well for a long time, and there's some pretty crappy tissue around there that can be improved significantly and give a lot of symptomatic relief as well.
Something has to cause the arthritity. You know,
right.
In the absence of trauma, or, you know, a hangman's fracture or something like that, where something has to cause it. So you might as well go in and fix what has caused it, and give them some relief. And you know, you can go and get a hip replacement. You can go and get a knee replacement. So follow the money, right? There's a lot of money in those surgeries. And, you know, why isn't there a lot of spinal
Right, I see where you're going now. Yeah.
Right. Where's the spinal arthritity research? Follow the money. You know, like that's it. Excuse me. But yeah, I forget where I was going, but that's it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting. I think, you know, in the work that we do, in being, you know, soft tissue specialists, I think there's a lot of benefit there for the arthritides, and especially the degenerative ones. Because as you say, why did that happen in the first place? And is that problem still there? Probably yes.
Yeah. And is it going to progress at a rate that you're going to be uncomfortable with? So, you know, degeneration is going to progress at, you know, whatever slope you want to define it as. And going in and removing that adhesion is not only going to improve your pain profile, so get a certain percentage of reductions in symptoms, it's actually going to decrease the slope, or the delta, or whatever. I use slope because I use that visual in practice. It's going to decrease the rate of progression. So what I love to tell patients, especially, you know, the 40-year-old with osteoarthritic knees, and we go in and clean the adhesion, I say my goal is for you is to have better knees than 95% of the population when they're 60 years old, right? If they're progressing at this rate, and fudge, how do I do this? And you're only progressing, you know what I mean? If your slope is lower than them, eventually they're going to surpass you, and eventually you're going to say, wow, I'm the healthiest fucking 65-year-old that I know. I can't fix the arthritis, but I can fix what's causing it, and I can slow it down to the point where it's developing I don't want to say that, but it's developing at a pace that's close to what, say, you and I are developing arthritis at as we speak.
Yeah. You can't fight time, but you can slow it down. That's about all we can do, right?
Relatively speaking, you can slow it down.
All right, man, we've knocked out a fair bit, and I think we've covered a bit of ground today, because we've gone way off topic. We've come back a bit again. Is there anything else you want to throw out there about diagnosis today?
If your physician does not give you a tissue-specific diagnosis, find a new physician. Take home point. That's it. Find somebody who will give you a clear answer. Shit, even if they're not right, having something specific is going to yield a better treatment plan than having something very generalized like mechanical back pain or tissue dysfunction or tissue extensibility disorder or anything like that. So find somebody who will give you very, very specific diagnoses. Ask questions. Get them to tell you their thought process as to why they came to that diagnosis. If you ask me any of my diagnoses and you care to actually go in the weeds with me, I will go so far in the fucking weeds that you'll feel like you're wearing a ghillie suit, and you won't, you know, your brain will be fried for the rest of the day because I'll give you so much information. So find somebody that's going to give you that information if you want that information, or find somebody that possesses the ability to go there if they need to go there, because their mind has to go there. So even if they don't communicate it to you verbally, you want to know how they're thinking.
Yeah, this whole series, this whole process that we're going through over 7 episodes, this is all about getting away from those non-specific diagnoses or those non-specific ideas of what the problem is. And, you know, for me, the non-specific low back pain, you know, we keep coming back to that, but it's still a thing. There's still papers that are published that refer to it and basically say that people just get better, and doesn't matter what you do. You don't really need to do too much. They'll be okay, and they will be okay until the next time. And so everything that we're doing here in terms of over these last 4 episodes and detailing, or 5 episodes now, but everything that we're detailing that's leading towards the next one, which is going to be treatment, is setting those details in place so that that treatment is actually aimed at something that is specific. It's not non-specific. It's actually understanding what's involved in that problem and what we need to do to start correcting that as much as possible. You know, it's not necessarily possible to go in and fix someone's degeneration, and there's things that we can't magically put back, but we can clean up around it, and we can do as much as we can. And so yeah, I think that's the biggest point that I take away from all this, is that we're doing as much as we can to be very specific.
Right on.
All right,
brother.
All right,
Have a
man.
wonderful, wonderful day. I got to talk to you twice in one day today, which was cool. I woke up to a text message from you, responded, we exchanged a few, then you went to sleep.
Yeah.
I've been up all day, and then you wake up, and the first thing we do is talk again. It's a beautiful day for you.
It's an amazing thing, just ball man kicking goals all over the place.
That's it.
All right, I'll see you soon.
See you, brother.